Hello there. In today's video I really want to try and convince you that red Douro Table wines can be absolutely brilliant. And what I've got here is a mature example of a single vineyard wine from a top Douro Table wine producer, and it's an early vintage of a wine from a company that was one of the first to really embrace the production of high quality table wines in the Douro. So the wine I have here today is from Alvesdesousa, it's from Quinta da Gaivosa, and it's their Vinhas de Lordelo, and it's the 2005 vintage of that. So Alvesdesousa are an award-winning, family-owned company owning 6 estates throughout Portugal's Douro Valley. And today they produce both ports and table wines. For generations, the de Sousa family had supplied both fruit and wines to large port houses such as Casa Farinha and Sociedade dos Borges. But when Domingos Alves de Sousa inherited the company in 1987, the port industry was in something of a crisis. A civil engineer by training, he chose to pivot the company's activities and become a producer bottler. So he built winemaking cellars at Quinta da Gaivosa, the company's main quinta in the Baía Corga, and he himself trained in winemaking both in Bordeaux and in Portugal. And his decision was to focus on making high quality table wines. He also acquired additional vineyards, and the first Alvesdesousa table wines made their appearance in 1992 with the release of the 1991 vintage. These wines quickly gained critical acclaim, and in 1999 the Revista de Vinhos, so Portugal's wine magazine, named him their wine producer of the year, something which the magazine repeated in 2007. Now, Domingos' son Tiago joined the company in 2002, and they'd also taken on a wine consultant, Anselmo Mendes. Subsequent to the production of this wine in 2010, they built a whole new architect-designed winery at Quinta da Gaivosa. At around the time that Tiago joined the company, they developed 2 single vineyard wines that they started producing at Quinta da Gaivosa. In 2003, they produced the first vintage of this wine, Vinhas de Lordelo. Then in 2004, they created a wine called Abandonado from a single, previously neglected, very steep old vineyard at the top of a hill. Vinhas de Lordelo had been chosen as all the vines in the vineyard are over 100 years old. And they'd long wanted to know more about the individual terroirs that existed on Quinta da Gaivosa, but because these plots were so small and yields were low, they'd all previously been vinified together. So they'd been aware of the high quality of the fruit coming off the plots, but had just never had the facilities to vinify them individually. And it was only through doing this that they really discovered the true nature of the Lordelo vineyard. And you can understand why that was so difficult, because this is a vineyard interplanted with over 30 indigenous Portuguese grape varieties. Being over 100 years old, its really meagre production is such that most companies would probably have grubbed it up and replanted. But they make the point that the family has a sort of an emotional attachment to the vineyard, its legacy, and now that it's been revealed, also its unique character. So as you can imagine, I don't actually have a precise blend for this. I don't even know all the varieties that go into it. The core grape varieties, however, are listed, and they give those as Touriga Nacional, Tinta Amarela, also known as Trincadeira in other regions, Malvasia Preta, which evidently is an extremely rare grape variety, and it's been suggested to me that Susau must also be planted in the vineyards. It turns out that 2005 was one of this region's driest years, and you do see that the alcohol on this is listed as being 15.5%, and I think that reflects the concentration that was achieved in the grapes in 2005. Now, everything was hand harvested and the entire vineyard was picked at the same time. So because all of the grape varieties are interplanted, they made what might be described as a field blend from them, with everything going into the fermenting vat at the same time. All the bunches were destemmed, and there was a 7-day fermentation at temperatures somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius, so not too high. They weren't trying to be too extractive. Post-fermentation maceration lasted a further 10 days, and that should have helped to smooth out the tannins a little. And then the wine was aged for nearly 2 years, 20 months in fact, in French oak barrels, 50% of which were new, and the 50% were being used for their second fill. Now the suggestion is that this is a wine that should age for 20, possibly even 30 years. And this wine gained a gold medal in the International Wine Challenge, along with some quite high marks, but I'll talk about scores later. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? First thing to say is the colour is deep and dark. When I swirl it, I can see that there's a sort of a slight browning at the rim, but it's not really losing very much colour at the edges to show that. The wine is completely opaque, and although there are brown hints, there's actually a real vivacity to the ruby colour as well. Swilling it, I've said the wine is 15.5% alcohol, and it's immediately showing massive tears down there. I'm expecting this is going to be quite tannic as well. So those are all things I would expect would contribute to its viscosity, so that's not a surprise at all. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Wow, that's powerful, complex, and exciting. You've got an underlying rich fruit with cooked plum, prune, raisin, really high ripeness with some quite high tone notes. There are savoury notes. There's sweet licorice in there. There are plenty of spices. There are sort of cedary notes, cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla top notes. All of these are beautifully combined, beautifully melded together. But yes, principally it's sort of rich, ripe, raisined fruit combined with some really lovely oak spices. I did see some tasting notes suggesting that when this was young, the oak on this was overly dominant. It'd be interesting to see what it's like on the palate. But on the nose, the two elements seem very well in balance. So let's have a taste. Wow, that's dense and mouth-filling. The wine is certainly full-bodied. It has a wonderful velvety, maybe slightly dusty, very fine-grained tannin. So fine there's almost a sort of a chocolatey smoothness when it's paired with the richness of the fruit behind it. Again, you've got very ripe fruit, ripe red plum, almost a prune, dried cranberry, raisin notes. It's lovely. There are these very ripe notes, and yet there still is a fresh red fruit note coming through from the acidity. The acidity doesn't stand out particularly because you've got this weight of fruit, richness and roundness of alcohol. Certainly there is a glycerol ripeness and roundness. It seems peculiar to say so when the wine is blatantly 15.5% alcohol, but the alcohol is not standing out particularly. The concentration of the fruit and the structure of the tannins is such that it's not leaving the finish hot. There's a richness and a concentration to the core of the wine. Now, if this was a Bordeaux, I might be saying licoricey, but actually it's not. It's more lively than, it's more that concentrated dried cranberry fruit, really ripe red plum, and hints of raisin. The wine has a really good length, thanks both to its concentration, but also to its acidity, which is giving a lovely freshness to the finish. If I wanted to sum up this wine, it's a 20-year-old wine that has a lot of the characteristics in terms of its lovely structure, some of those developed notes that you'll have with an older Bordeaux. And yet with the concentration and the ripeness of the fruit, it's almost the combination of the characteristics of a well-aged Bordeaux with a mature port. The wine's very attractive. As I say, that freshness is still leaving some fairly lively red fruit on the tip of my tongue. In terms of the wine's age, I'm opening it when it's just over 20 years old. And other than the slight browning of the colour and the wonderful harmony of its elements, I don't see this as an old wine. The acidity and the concentration of the fruit is such that there's still a lovely freshness there. I think the suggestion that this would last another 10 years is quite reasonable, and it might well keep for longer than that. I was really looking forward to tasting this wine, and I have to say I think it's exceeded my expectations. I was a little surprised to see that the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this was sitting down at 89 out of 100. I think possibly some of that may be a result of its oak having shown quite obviously when it was younger. I think this is a wine that's clearly in balance now, and I think that a score of 93, possibly even 94, would be much more appropriate for the wine that I'm tasting in my glass at the moment. So yes, if you're not familiar with the top red wines from the Douro, they are well worth getting acquainted with. I will say they're not necessarily cheap wines, and to that end I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available, and you can also see at what price it's selling. But I really do think that these, and this wine in particular, are wines that actually can deliver on their prices. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be great if you'd press the like button. Please do that. If you're watching these videos, you're enjoying them, and you haven't subscribed yet, it would be great if you could do that. The subscriber numbers do really help show the algorithm that people love the channel and help it to grow. If you have any comments, do please pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about Douro Reds that you've tried, about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else relating to this. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, please feel free to pass it on to them. I'd be very grateful to you for that. But thank you so much once again for joining me, and I do hope that maybe you'll make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.